Hello and namaskar to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And once again, we are here with something interesting for you. Today, we will be discussing something interesting about the Chinese society and how it is so similar to the other societies that are present in our world, and how that particular society mirrors itself or is a mirror of every other society, but still wants to be different from others. Now, here we have got a paper from a doctor, Tiejun Cheng and Mark Selden, who had written about the societal structures of the China and which are being, uh, let's say, uh, created after the Chinese Communist Party took over the China in around 1949. So here it goes. Origins and consequences of the China's Hokkyu system. Hokkyu system means it is a kind of a caste system, hierarchical system. Now, throughout the 1950s, China implemented a code of laws, regulations, and programs whose effect was formally to differentiate residential groups as well as a means to control population movement and mobility to shape state government developmental priorities. So basically, they wanted to separate urban areas and rural areas so they can control the development or they can control the population around that in those areas because China had a huge population. They could not be present everywhere and uh, crush every rebellion that could be there. Now, the Hokkyu system, which emerged in the course of a decade, was integral to the collective transformation of the countryside to a demographic strategy that restricted urbanization and to the redefinition of a city countryside and state society relation. So they wanted to establish communist ideology, or they want to reform the society and how its relationship to the state functions. This article offers a documentary study tracing the origins and development of the Hokkyu system uh, of population registration and control, and scrutinizes its relationship to a course of connected institutions. For clues to understanding distinctive features of China's developmental uh, tra- trajectories and social structures in the era of mobilizational collectivization, it considered far-reaching consequences of the Hokkyu system with a particular attention. If you can move it up, thank you. A little bit down, yes. But particular attention to its implications for the creation of spatial hierarchies, essentially, especially its consequences for redefining the positions of villagers in the Chinese social system. So basically, they were defining how the villagers will be functioning. Or basically, they were telling that the villagers will be the backbone of the society. They will be feeding. They have no other course of actions for them, just providing the food for the urban area. Literally. China's Hockey system of population registration has long been and remains today the central institutional mechanism defining the city-countryside relationship and shaping important elements of state society relationship relations in the People's Republic. Hockey registration not only provided the principal basis for establishing identity, citizenship, and proof of official status, it was essential for every aspect of daily life. Without registration, one cannot establish a legitimacy for food, eligibility for food, clothing, or shelter, obtain employment, go to school, marry, or enlist in the army. So basically, it was a state control by which this system was used. Moreover, as Judith Benster noted of the bifurcated social order produced by the registration system. Urban areas are essentially owned and administered by the state, and their residents are state's direct responsibility. The state budget must supply urban areas with employment, housing, food, water, sewage disposal, transportation, medical facilities, police protection, schools, and other essential amenities of the life. So basically, it was a kind of welfare system where state will take care of everything for the urban areas and nothing for the rural areas. The opposite side of the coin is that the state assumes direct responsibility for none of these services for the countryside. Just like I said, everything for the urban areas and nothing for the rural areas. Rural areas will be on their own. They will be doing everything on their own. Government will not interfere, nor it will help them. Nor does it provide rural people with any of the vital services and welfare and entitlement that the urban areas receive. Little bit down, a little more. Yes. Welfare entitlements that are routinely provided to urban residents, particularly to state sector employees, just the bureaucrats, every kind of bureaucrats. They have a multiple kind, like in India, including free and subsidized healthcare, retirement benefits, and subsidized food and housing. To the extent that any of these services have been available in the countryside, they have relied on highly, uh, next paragraph, highly differentiated resources allocated by self-reliant rural communities or to or their collective subunits, like the district, the higher level of the village, which was monitoring the villages. The origin of Hukou system lies embedded in the Bourgeois system of population registration and mutual surveillance perfected over millennia, as its antecedents also lie in 20th century techniques of social control that were perfected in areas under Kuomintang, which was the nationalist government, and the Japanese rule, and in the communist-led revolutionary base areas. Equally important is the direct influence of social uh, Soviet passbook system. So Soviets also had a similar kind of system where they would restrict the movement of people from villages to urban areas or urban to village areas. So they can control the population in any particular area at any given time, or they can monitor the people there, how they are behaving, if their behavior is against the state, if they are against it, then they will be eliminated, just like that. And if they are not, then they will be uh, cuddled and will be taken care of to some extent. And the role of the Soviet advisors is creating a social orders that could be mobilized in the service of the socialist developmental priorities. So the government will decide which sector you want to prioritize. If it is wrong or not, they do not care about it. Everything has to be in that order. As Michael Button has observed, the hierarchical systems founded on and built around the family register link the order of the family to the order of the state. So they are directly related. The Hockey system transform the nature of both in ways integral to a developmentalist state and a mobilized populace. It emerged as the critical state response to dilemmas inherent in China's development strategies under conditions of high population density, labor surplus, and capital shortage in a predominant agrarian society. So they had everything, but nothing also. They did not have the capital to invest, but they had, other than capital, they had everything. They had the resources, they had the manual labor, they had everything other than the capital. And without the capital, there is nothing they can do. The Hockey system decisively shaped China's collective socialism by creating a spatial hierarchy of urban places and prioritizing the city over the countryside by controlling population movement up and down. Next paragraph. Up, but a little bit over. You've gone too far. Up and down the specially defined status hierarchical. preventing population flow to the larger cities, enforcing the permanent exile of urban residents to the countryside, and blinding people to the city, villages and cities of their birth, and by transferring the locus of decision making with respect to the population mobility, and work for the transformed household to the work unit, and then specifically in the countryside to the lowest unit of collective. Basically, they had basically entrench themselves. They wanted to entrench themselves to every aspect of the society, from household level to the highest order of state. They wanted everywhere so they can control, and uh, they can form the society. They can guide the society and people wherever they wanted to. You will also notice that they were. Uh, there is a reason why Indian cities and Chinese cities are very different. Indian societies will have very hodgepodge kind of houses. There will be people who are too poor to live here. They will be living on the not side of the road, but in a kind of semi permanent or temporary houses, because they had come from the village. They don't know anything, and they don't have money to uh, let's say rent a house or anything like that. You will not see in China anything like this. Even in 2000, where they were just in the initial phase of industrialization, because everything was controlled. Who will be coming to the cities and how many will be coming to the cities, everything was decided. Now, how everything will be done, everything was decided by the government. So there you will not see poverty in the cities of the China, because there is nobody there to be poor. Everyone who is poor is just reside in the countryside. Over more than 3 decades, the Hukou system structured the differential opportunity afforded urban rural people in general, and state employees and the tillers of the soil, basically farmers in particular. This discussion examines the years prior to 1960, when the Hukou system and related mechanisms such as grain rationing and forced immigration from the largest cities emerged full blown simultaneously with state penetration of the countryside, collectivization, and market control. So they were facing a severe issue around the time they came to the power in 1950s, early 1950s, because of the Japanese brutalities in the northern areas and the coastal areas. All the population concentration, there was a lot of refugees at the time. So all of them went to the city to find job, or to find means to survive. So there are cities are overcrowded, and all the people that were living in the cities, they did not have the capacity to feed themselves, because they were not farmers. All the farmers resided on the countryside. Now, this was according to them. That is not my personal viewpoint, but according to them, this was the situation. So they had pretty much emptied out half of the population of their cities to the countryside again, so they can have more farmers who can feed the remaining people who are residing in the cities, so they can pretty much do the rest of the work. Now, this discussion. Now, where were we? Hmm. That system, in all essentials, remained intact into the early 1980s, and its imprint in important respect continues to the present. Now, preparatory period 1949 to 1952. In September 1949, on the eve of the establishment of People's Republic, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Next paragraph. Next page. Yes. Yes. Conveyed in by Ping, the conference symbolic of communist effort to give institutional expression to the united front in the view new order, issued the Common People Program, the China's de facto constitution under the National People's Congress rectified the first formal constitution in 1951. It guaranteed a plethora of freedoms and rights, among them one rarely specified in other societies and never mentioned in the official Chinese document after 1950. So basically, they had gone all out to to get the goodwill of the people, to cajole them. So they they gave them every kind of freedom, freedom to speech, freedom of every kind of right and every kind of freedom they can imagine. They have just given them, and just within a year, all those freedom were removed from the constitution. There is nothing that can there is nothing that exists after. Freedom of residence, migration. Article 5 stipulated that the people of People's Republic China shall have freedom of thought, speech, publication, assembly, association, correspondence, person, domicile, moving from one place to another, religious freedom, freedom to hold processions and demonstration. Everything just was thrown out of the window just within a year. The common program reiterated historical practice concerning freedom of domicile and movement as a codified in the 1911 provisions Constitution of the Republic of China. So the previous government before the Kuomintang, the hodgepodge government that was established after the defeat from the Japanese at the time. Article 90 of the 1954, I think during Boxer Rebellion, somewhere around that, Boxer or earlier. No, not that time. Article 90 of the 1954 Constitution similarly guarantees people freedom of residence and freedom to change their residence, the movement rights, like any other society they were giving them. Now, no, the governments of no governments of either the King Dynasty or the Republic under Kuomintang warlord or Japanese rule had prevented intra-rural migration. So migration between villages or migration to urban areas. So migration between village and city, except in contested zones in time of strife. Intra-rural migration permitted flight from famine as well as population movement to thinly populated regions, particularly the migration of millions throughout the first half of the 20th century to Chinese from the to Chinese northeast. The next paragraph. Yes, yes. Uh, as well as overseas. So the Chinese were moving here to there according because of the situation that was evolving around that time. Moreover, the rural migrants regularly obtained seasonal and long-term urban jobs through personal introductions by friends, relatives, and contractors, or through village ties. Throughout the early, so this was the norm. Even in any other society, like any other society, the only way to get a job was through a contact, either a family friend or a relative or some other kind of contact that you will have. He will uh, get your job. Throughout the early 1950s, the honeymoon years of the People's Republic, free movement into and out of the cities and throughout the countryside facilitated economic recovery, restoration of trade, and social healing after a century of political disintegration, protracted foreign invasion, and civil war. So it was a time to recover from all the brutalities that the Chinese had faced. Now, from early years of the China People's Republic, however, the state addressed problems of urban unemployment in two ways, indicative of its differentiated approach to city and countryside. So they were addressing primarily all the problems that what they were addressing were primarily focused on the urban rather than the rural, because most of the people around the time, just like in India or any other country, because China was not an industrial state at the time, all of them were living in the villages. So rather than focusing there primarily, they were focusing on the cities because major the cities that were industrial, they had quite a large population because of the refugees and other kind of problems. First, from very early on, it accepted the responsibility to feed urban unemployed. So basically, useless people, they wanted to feed them rather than provide them jobs. We should set aside 2 billion catties of grain. So catties is a kind of measuring unit in Chinese of grain to solve the problem of feeding the people. Next paragraph. Yes, unemployed workers. Secondly, in 1949 and after, it both pressed and assisted hundreds of thousands of wartime refugees and jobless urban residents in Beijing, Shanghai, and other large cities to resettle in the countryside. Shanghai's population had swollen with refugees during the resistance and civil wars, and the Chiang Kai-shek's May 1949 naval blockade fueled unemployment in the cities. The new government not only set about creating jobs and providing relief, it also sent 350,000 people back to Anhui and northern Jiangsu between July 1949 and March 1950. Echoing Shanghai Party Secretary Rao Shushi's August 1949 call for decentralization to the interior. So basically, he wanted to move the people to the interior of China rather than the coast. He wanted to disperse the population. A Dango Bo editorial of 11 August 1949 asserted that Shanghai is a producing city and can maintain only a population of 3 million. Now, how they are coming with that number is beyond logic, but still, whatever it is. It called on the other 3 million people to leave, basically get out. In 1950, Rao Shoshi outlined the party's dominant approach to resettlement of Shanghai's urban unemployment. No more than 3 million of Shanghai's 6 million people actually take part directly or indirectly in the productive work. We should, first of all, so they have decided who is productive and who is not productive. We should first of all mobilize a great number of refugees and unemployed masses to return to the countryside to areas flooded by the Yellow River in northern Inshu and salt producing areas in the northern. So basically, these were your Manchurian provinces, the upper areas, as well as those landlords. We should persuade all refugee landlords as well as those landlords and rich peasants deceived by the enemy to come to Shanghai, as well as peasants and youth forced by the enemy to migrate to Shanghai to return to their next. Yes, little bit upwards. Last 2 to 3 lines were left. Yes. Now we should encourage wherever possible and necessary certain no, okay, peasant youth return to their respective places of origin to participate in production. We should encourage wherever possible and necessary certain schools and factories to move inland so as to have convenient access to food, coal, and raw materials. In the early 1950s, administrators in Shanghai and other major cities urged millions of refugees and urban and unemployed urban workers and family members to go to the countryside. So basically, return to your native land. Rao's particular targeting of landlords and rich peasants for repatriation to the countryside, from where many had fled, land reforms is one of the earliest indication of the intertwining of issues of population control and class struggle. His report also called for the transfer of major Shanghai industry to inland location in smaller cities and rural areas, a strategy that would be pursued over subsequent decades. So basically, this was the reason for the destruction of their industry, pretty much until Deng Xiaoping came. Because they did not have the access to the foreign markets or any markets because they had moved inland. So they did not have nor did they have the educated labor that can produce anything, nor did they have anywhere to sell it from because the charges, the cost to get it to the coast and from there to somewhere where they can buy or someone else can buy would have been quite a lot compared to any other nation. Rao made explicit several important principles and perspectives that would eventually be incorporated in the Hockey system. First was the distinctive distinction between producers and consumers, that is, between productive and unproductive persons. Not, not only were homemakers and dependents denied recognition as productive person, but even employees in the uh, next paragraph, employees in the service, commercial, and financial sectors were frequently classified as unproductive, just like any other communist government, they were thrown out pretty much from the productive class. Secondly, he made clear the state's intention to transfer industry and personnel to conform with planning criteria, including the transfer of industry schools away from major metropolitan areas. Third, it was state's prerogative to return migrants to their native places. And finally, there was the view that Shanghai was overpopulated. Even this time, they had already gone to the debate of population and overpopulation. It's too early for that. So at this time, the state policies emphasized voluntary programs, persuasion, and provisions of uh, positive incentives to achieve population relocation. But the intention to restrict the population of major cities and conduct large-scale rapid repatriation to the countryside as a solution to problems of unemployment and hunger was already clear. So they were just thinking that this will solve some kind of problems like unemployment and hunger and such. Other major cities adopted similar approaches to population transfer. Government provided material and administrative support for migrants to the rural areas. The Beijing municipal government and the Shenyun and the Char provisional government established resettlement offices, reserved land and housing for migrants, and arranged credit in kind for settlers in frontier areas. By spring plugging in 1950, uh, the spring plane, People's Daily reported that 4,700 people had left Beijing for Shenyun and 2,400 had moved to Char. In addition, 300, uh, 340 workers and their families went from Beijing to Benzi, an industrial city in Liaoning province. Tianjin uh, provided Tianjin provided passage for 1,741 people to go to China. Next paragraph. Hmm. And returned to their home 22,000 students and landlords who had fled the northeast. Shenyang relocated over 3,300 people in Liaoning and elsewhere in the northeast. These were undoubtedly a small part of those sent out and or assisted in the resettling in smaller cities and villages. There were two basic reasons why many people accepted relocation and why the settlement processes were accomplished smoothly in the early years of People's Republic. First, relocation was basically voluntary, with the important exception of criminal or class enemies. So the class wars were still going on. In most cases, it was accomplished without coercion, and frequently financial support facilitated the process. Compulsory relocation was reserved for cases of ideological re-education and questionable elements, especially former Kuomintang officials and landlords who had fled to the cities during the civil war or land reform. General Zhao Ziyu, secretary of the Kuomintang commander Fu Jiayin, who led the uprising and peaceful liberation of Beijing, subsequently recalled that during the campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries, which coincided with the relocation project, hundreds of thousands of Kuomintang party members and soldiers were gaoled and were executed. Some were executed. Others felt relief at having escaped punishment. There was little resistance to government directives sending such people out of Beijing. Similar relocations originated in Tanjiang, uh, Guangzhou, and other urban centers. Next. Uh, The second factor conducive to relocation was its uh, association with the land dispute and state subsidies. The state provided each migrant from Beijing and Tanjiang to Shuin and Sao 5 to 6 mu of land and a loan of 560 kts of millet. Jinlin province guaranteed each migrant a 7-month grain and vegetable allowance. This support plus free transport and free transport attracted many unemployed and poor urban residents, particularly recent migrants from the countryside. Most important, there were no barriers to re-entry to the city at that time. After that, it was pretty much separated. On 16 July 1951, Ministry of Public Security, with the state council approval, issued a regulation governing the urban population. The present regulations, it began, were formulated with a view to maintain social peace and order, safeguarding the people's security, protecting their freedom of residence and of movement. This document may in fact be said to have formally initiated the process which in course of a decade effectively denied the Chinese people freedom of residence and movement, placing decisions in this realm in the hands of the state. It divided rural households into six categories and urban households into six categories, which with the regulations governing it. Residential households, industrial, commercial households, public residential, residents like hotels and etc. Floating households living in boats and ships, and temple households and alien foreign residents. Article 5 stipulated that all those who move should first notify the local explorer. Hmm. Yes. First notify the local public security organ of change of residence. Cancel the census record of the former adobe and apply for change of residence permit. Basically, they were the licensing was already introduced at that time in just a year and a half. Similarly, after any move, people were required to report to the local public security organ to enter their names with the census record within 3 days of arrival. When available, a change of residence permit should be submitted. If not, the other relevant documents should be submitted instead. For the first time, a nationwide mechanism was established to monitor urban population movement and residents, both long and short term. For example, visitors of 3 days or longer were required to register with the public security substation, and hospital and hotel residents were similarly registered. Basically, everything was monitored where anyone was moving. Significantly, responsibility for registration and control were vested in the Public Security Bureau. Next, this we can move. Nevertheless, with the exception of those under police investigation, almost anyone who applied for a permit to move could obtain it and then register anywhere, including Beijing and Shanghai. For most people, the new system simply recorded changes from one residence to another. Like contemporary Japan's Koseki system for neighborhood registration and like comparable systems in Taiwan, South Korea, and a number of other countries, it provided the police with next uh, next page, please. Information that could be used for social control, but did not normally impinge on freedom of the migrants, work or residence. The 1951 regulations established a national system of urban population registration. The State Council's 3rd August 1952 decision on labor employment problems was among the first to address systematically the problem of blind rural influx into the city. So basically, what every other country would face, they were just not letting it happen. Urban and industrial development and the progress of national construction will absorb the necessary rural labor, but this must be done gradually and cannot be accomplished at all at once. It is therefore necessary to prevail upon the peasants and check their blind desire to flow into the city. Like many other contemporary documents, it presented registration and the control as short-term measure required to address imbalances whose long-term solution lay in industrialization and national construction. This document made distinctions that would soon become absolute between urban and rural residents and between those entitled to urban and rural employment. But it did not establish mechanisms to control or halt the blind flow of population. So they were moving slowly. They were attempting to curb the movement of the migrants from rural to urban, but they were doing it step by step because all the previous steps were not still not working. So they were going above and beyond after this. Next, next page. Yes. In the early 1950s, the state took vigorous steps to address problems of the urban unemployment, including welfare for urban citizens, repatriation of unemployed rural migrants. Throughout the People's Republic, however, policymakers have consistently assumed both that the countryside could absorb virtually unlimited supply of labor, because even there, the price of labor will collapse if all the people move to the rural areas. The price in the urban areas will surge and the prices in the rural area will collapse on its own because of the excess availability of labor, where rural areas already had excess availability of labor, and then they introduce more. Could absorb virtually unlimited supply of labor, and that feeding the rural population was the responsibility of each locality. So everyone moved to the rural area, and they will look after on their own. State doesn't have the responsibility to look after them. The administrative and welfare responsibility of the state would, in essence, be confined to a small minority of the people living in urban areas. One reason for this hypersensitivity to urban problems is the fact that the new state accepted more or less uh, axiomatically from the start, presumably from uh, derived from the social Soviet practice, a responsibility that no previous Chinese state has ever assumed to provide jobs and subsidized food and housing for all urban residents. For 3 decades from the early 1950s, China's cities were largely free of telltale signs of urban poverty, characteristics of cities in both core and peripheral regions from Kolkata to Rio to uh, Los Angeles. So basically, they were removing the unwanted people, the poor people. They wanted them to go, and all the other ones that were poor, they just uplifted them because they did not have the responsibility for anyone else, so they can do that much, including squatter settlements, armies of beggars, and the chronic unemployed. Everything was removed. China had by no means solved the poverty problem. Through many foreign visitors mistakenly concluded this from the absence of squatter housing and beggars in 1960s and 70s. So everyone just because you have visited a particular single city, you are extrapolating that city to whole of a country, just like that. And even then they were doing that. It had, however, eliminated the most visible manifestations of poverty in urban areas by a combination of next mm, by a combination of employment and welfare measures for urban residents and control that restricted the size of urban population and even sought to reverse the flow from countryside to city. By contrast, the countryside was repeatedly forced to absorb virtually unlimited supply of labor and even to accept and feed urban migrants in time of famine. This policy of discarding the surplus and unemployable urban youth in the rural periphery, in the absence of unemployment insurance or any national welfare program extending to the countryside, that reduced the financial responsibility of the state. Next paragraph. Of the state and shifted the burden of feeding and employing repatriated people from state to the rural society. The result was the creation of dual society with the state resources channeled primarily to the cities At the same time, the substantial portion of the rural surplus was transferred to urban industry and the military and the other state priority projects. Throughout the early 1950s, despite benefits to the countryside associated with land reform, state resettlement of refugees and unemployed, and the state effort to reverse the flow, the number of migrants to the cities grew rapidly. It is not so easy to control the movement of the people. It had not reached the all encompassing the structure that they have today. According to the People's Daily report of 1926 November 1952, rural surplus labor is not a few areas has recently been moving blindly towards the cities. Most of these peasants have credentials or having moving permits from local people's governments, and some bring their families with them. Viewed from the perspective of the authorities, this migration constituted either a serious problem or an opportunity, depending on a rapidly changing labor supply conditions in the city. As Christopher Home has documented for Shanghai, the party's major campaign from Sanfan to Wufan, 3 NT to 5 NT, movements in the city to the acceleration and relaxation of mutual aid and cooperation movement in the countryside throughout the early 1950s profoundly influenced the ebb and flow of labor to and from the city. Uh, next, next paragraph. Hmm. Largest city. The result was series of cycles, tightening and loosening control on the flow of population throughout the decade. Party's perspective on the urban population problems in the early years of the People's Republic embodied two contradictory, even uh, schizophrenic, uh, schizophrenic dimensions. On the one hand, the authorities held an urban-centered perspective on China's development, stressing the critical role of workers in the cities in the industrialization process. This was consistent with the urban and proletarian orientation of the Marxist tradition, and above all, with the thinking of Soviet planners and the advisors who shaped China's first five-year plan with their emphasis on heavy industry. On the other hand, the cities were associated with capitalism, imperialism, and Kuomintang. Cities owed their existence basically to class antagonism and contradictions. Such antagonisms and contradictions manifested themselves most visibly in the age of capitalism. Some even went as far as to quote the Qing dynasty's official Gao Tinglin: "When the mass dwells in villages, order prevails. When the masses flock to the city, disorder ensues." The first issue of Genting Raibo, the Shanghai Party organ, summed up the party's ambivalence towards China's greater city. Next paragraph. Hmm. As the 1950s advanced, Mao and others highlighted the position of the working class and the cities as the future of China, a view enshrined in the priorities of the first five-year plan. In 1957, pondering the future of the working class and the peasantry, Mao noted China had only 12 million industrial workers out of the population of 600 million. The number is so small, but only they have a future. All other classes are transitional classes. The peasants in the future will become mechanized and will be transformed into agricultural workers. Right now, there is a system of ownership by peasant cooperatives. In future, in a few decades, they will be changed to the like factories. They will become agricultural factories. In this factory, you plant maize, rice, etc. As for the bourgeoisie, they too will become workers. The several hundred million peasants and handicraft workers have now already become collective farmers. In the future, they will become state farmers, agricultural workers using machinery. For Mao, the congruence of ownership changes towards the mechanization and industrialization would produce the merging of social classes. So according to him, if we take ownership, if the state takes the ownership, all the classes will merge because everyone will be beggar. There is nothing other than nobody owns anything other than the state. So everyone is equal. Next. Would produce the merging of the classes, introducing working class. So the only class will be working class. Working class, the peasantry and the bourgeoisie into a single industrial working class. Everything will work for the state. In fact, state policies, of which the Hukou system was the keystone, deepened the divide between city and the countryside, between workers and farmers, and in numerous ways next prevented uh, little bit up. There were 3 to 4 lines left. Hmm. Yes, or showed anticipated homogenization above all by freezing rural residents in their village and denying them access to the urban and industrial employment. Initiation of the Hockey system 1953 to 1957. In 1953, China had basically completed land reform and economic recovery from the century of disintegration, invasion, and war. The promulgation that the year of Great Lion for the transition period, heralding the start of the first 5-year plan, was emblematic of the leadership's intention to move ahead simultaneously with class transformation and accelerated industrialization. By the end of 1956, 97% of the rural households had joined the cooperatives, including 88% in large collectives of the Soviet type. At the same time, over 74,000 handicraft cooperatives were set up, including 6 million craft workers, 92% of the total number of such workers. In 1956, 68% of the factories had been nationalized. So basically, half of them had already been nationalized. Those who could not resist had already fled the country. Those who could resist, they either had joined the party or they had done something else. Now next, uh, yes, and the remainder was classified as a joint state-private enterprise. This next page. Hmm. So effectively brought all industry and virtually all commerce into the orbit of state control. So everything was moving towards the states. They were basically, to some extent, were doing what the Stalin had done. They were industrializing, but in a Chinese, somewhat Chinese way, to some extent, a mix of Chinese and Soviet way. But the final end result was the same: the state control of everything, workers, production, everything. Everything has to be under the state. In short, the transformation from private to capitalist ownership to state and collective ownership of the agriculture, industry, handicraft, and commerce was basically completed in the year 1953 to 1956. Parallel with the parallel with and integral to ownership transformation, the extent of the plant. He was a fanboy of Stalin, but there is something weird about the communists is that when they get in power, they are the they are the hyper nationalist of anybody. You will not see a nationalist greater than them. They are the they are of the highest order, we can say. So he will not be copying. Even if Mao wanted to, he cannot and will not copy everything. But he still Stalin was alive in 1955. Stalin had a greater control over the way the Chinese were functioning. But after he had died, the Chinese had pretty much They had drifted away from the Soviets. With China, the Stalin had a horror of its own. We can say he had the mechanisms to control communists of the other countries, but the later ones did not had the capacity to control the Chinese one. Hmm. These collective control, where were we? The extension of the planned economy and the state established mechanisms to control population movement, particularly to bind peasants to their collective village. So basically, they were forming all these ownership and the cooperatives to have the villagers stay in the village rather than move to the cities, and to regulate and restrict entry of the cities. This regulatory framework still exists to this day. The Chinese even today have to have a permit to move to the cities, and if they want to go to the village, they still need a permit to move. These permits are not discussed to into in details, but these are compulsory there. These population control mechanisms, whose importance has largely been overlooked in the literature, focusing on collectivization, nationalization, and development, shaped China's countryside from mid 1950s forward. This defined important parameters of an urban-rural divide that has controlled opportunity and mobility to the detriment of the villagers ever since. So basically, they came on the backs of the villagers, and they were shooting the villagers in the back because they were doing everything for the cities rather than the villages, as as they had promised. And even after that, they had restricted the movement. They had overflooded the countryside with the refugees from the cities. They overburdened the villages, and even after that, they would take a portion of that surplus. We cannot even call the surplus because of the famines that were going on during that time. But whatever the thing that the villages produced, they were taking that to the cities. The uh, untouchability is kind of in every society you will see untouchability. Even in Japan, you will see in Britain. Britain was kind of similar to Japanese system in a sense. Just like you will not touch or even let's say talk to persons of the different class. Uh, Not class, I would say class. These uh, uh, what we today call class, like butler and uh, all those things. They were pretty much family business, I would say, or a family occupation in a sense, because the father would pass on his trade to his son, and he will pass on to his son in a sense. Now, these population control mechanisms, whose importance has largely been overlooked in the literature, focusing on collectivization, nationalization, and development, shaped China's country. That that defined important parameters of an urban-rural divide that has controlled opportunities and mobility to the detriment of the village ever since. China's urban population increased from 10.6% of total population in 1946 to 14.6% in 1950s, with a net gain of 34 million people. Rural migrants accounted for 19.8 millions of the total increase. In the first half of the 1950s, the most powerful stimulus for migration lay in the pool of the cities, like any other. Uh, like anywhere else, the villagers will always move in the cities for better opportunities. Above all, the attraction of urban employment that offered workers security, a range of benefits and prestige. Now, remember, all all the things, all kinds of welfare that was provided by the Chinese government, it was only limited to the cities. So, in these conditions, the state of city becomes even more attractive. It is a kind of this creates a kind of desperation in the villagers, because in the village you will have to fend for yourself. If you move to city, even if you do not have a job, the government will provide a job. They will support you in any and every way they can. So it is it is the most inciting offer they can have if they can reach the cities. In the above all the attraction of the employment, yet there were also push factors. These included flight from the poorer areas, flight from the regions, discontent with cooperatives, and the loss of income earning opportunities. Because of the overflooding of the countryside, you will have those. Uh, Now, next, there are the yes. Uh, these included yes, the loss of income earning opportunities associated with the market as the state curtailed private commerce. So, just like in India, they set a minimum or maximum price you can sell, and all the things that were being sold, they were brought by the rather than merchants to some extent. The larger portion of that was bought by the state because they had to feed the uh, cities. So they would cap it at a certain price where the state wanted, and all the things had to be sold at that price. So the villagers will not be able to earn much because of that. Restricted and then largely eliminated opportunities for rural people to obtain seasonal or long-term work in the cities. So just like anywhere else, what used to happen was a particular time of year they would go for the cities to work, and after that, when there is time for the farming season, they will come back and they will farm. So it was a half and half year. So the farming season they will go for the villages, and the rest of the season they will move to the cities for the employment. And centralized agriculture processing in metropolitan area. Such policies governing the cities and urbanizations were an essential part of the 5-year plan's approach to industrialization. The key were 18 cities designed designated as focal point for China's heavy industrial drive. China's leaders sought to decentralize the existing economy and population concentration in a handful of large cities. As the state, partly from the security reasons, limited growth in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Tianjin, and other large coastal cities. They were, I think, I'm not too sure about inland key point cities. Many of them, of small and medium size, became the focus for rapid growth through building complete set of industries. Each city was to receive. Next. Hmm. Each such city was to receive 11 or more above norm industrial projects, with Xi'an in the northwest designated to receive 42 projects. On 17 April 1953, the State Council promulgated a directive on persuading peasants from blind influx into cities. So they were, it's a condescending tone. They were telling the peasants, "You do not know what to do, so we will tell you what to do," referring about all the largest cities. The directive, using the persuasive language, urged the hundreds of thousands of peasants who had entered the city in search of work to return to their villages, exempting them, uh, except, exempting those who had already obtained employment and had government properties. Next page. Government of factory papers to prove it. China's 1953 census was a landmark event in implementing registration procedures. In Shanghai and other major cities, the census was accompanied by the insurance, issuance of new and far more detailed household registration books that recorded the birth, death, residence, education, and occupation of every household member. When the measures prompted by these city Why this state guideline failed to stem the population flow to major cities 1 year later, on 12 March 1954, the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Labor promulgated a joint directive to control blind influx of peasants into cities. The term Manglui, Manglui blind migrant was widely used to describe rural migrants. A reverse homophone for Louis Mang, meaning hooligan. So they were like they were paraphrasing hooligan as a blind migrant. Established a negative association with the rural migrants, and this still continues. Even now, if you go there, the rural migrants are not seen very favorably. Labor flows from the countryside to the cities would be determined by a fiat. If in the future additional workers are needed for urban construction, the district and township governments will be officially directed to recruit rural labor in a planned and organized manner. That is, rural recruits would presumably return to the countryside as the conclusion of their employment. So you will be employed for a certain period, then you will be told to uh, go back to your villages. Villagers customarily obtained critical supplements to agricultural income by going to the city in slack season or for long periods to find uh, next, periods to find factory or construction work or to paddle. Survival strategies, however, moreover, dictated that some family members leave home to find work for years at a time in cities or other localities with superior job opportunities. In Raoyang country, in southern Hebei, for instance, in the early 1950s, roughly one-fourth of the rural adult males worked in the cities during the winter months, and many more left for the locality for years at a time. In 1954, as the state moved toward control of labor, private markets and grain rural cadre were directed to keep farmers in the village and to use locally available carbon labor to promote soil improvement, water conservancy, and other capital construction projects to occupy villagers during slack season. In 1954, Population Directive curbed rural-urban movement through three different channels. It prohibited urban units from making private arrangements to recruit rural laborers. It directed local governments to halt uncoordinated recruitment in the villages, and it orders managers and union leaders to instruct workers not to invite people from their villages to come to the cities in the search of work. Off-farm slack season job opportunity grew scarce, as did full-time industrial jobs in the city. The state subsequently attempted to cut off all non-official recruitment channels. Urban labor departments allocated jobs to relevant country and township governments according to state plan. Local governments in turn allocated recruitment quotas to predominantly suburban villages where thanks, the local cadre made the selection. Opportunities up now. Here what happens is because of the system that they were introducing. So you will need a permission from this guy, a permission from this guy. There will be a guy in the city who will decide that he needs the workers. So he will inform a guy in the village that he needs workers. Now here what happens is the local representative, the local cadre of the Communist Party, he become a blot. So he will take money, lots of money from the people who want to go to the city for work. He will take a lot of money from them, and in return he will send them instead of anybody else. So this was a kind of competition between this created a competition between the villages, that if you did not had a connection, direct connection to the party cadre or the one who is sending you to the cities, you will not be able to go to the cities. So it became a kind of a caste system where only the people who are close to the person who is in charge of organizing these movements, he will be the only one who will tell who will go and who will not. So this forms a close knit connection around him, where he is kind of a, let's say, a local landlord there. He will decide what you will do, what you will not do. Your life has become dependent on that particular guy. He has become your pretty much everything in your life. So this created this made the situation of the already, let's say, already problems, or the problems that were faced by the villagers, it had already made it worse, the system. And they are on going on making it worse and worse by every passing year. Now, finally, the state subsequently, yes, finally, in 1954 directive called for returning unemployed migrants in major cities to their villages. This was called. This was to be handled by the civil affairs and labor administrations in the conjunctions with the other relevant. The later referring to the police. The state provided subsidies to repatriate those who lacked travel funds. Nevertheless, during periods of economic boom, when labor was in short supply, attempts to prevent immigration from the countryside proved ephemeral, as factories used direct contact to hire workers. The ability of the authorities to enforce the new regulation hinged as heavy on rural as on urban income and employment conditions. In 1955, for example, Shanghai authorities successfully returned 500,000 rural migrants to the countryside with minimal friction following a bumper harvest when food in the countryside was plentiful. Between 1954 and 1956, three important measures tightened administrative control over population flow within and between urban and rural areas. So before, they were restricting the movement between rural and urban areas. Now they are focusing on the movement in itself of rural and urban area. If you can move in the rural area or not. On 31st December 1954, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress promulgated regulations for public security subtractions. Substations. It mandated municipal and country public security bureaus to set up substations in areas under their jurisdiction. In urban areas, substations typically covered neighborhoods or an entire district in small cities, embracing 30,000 to 50,000 people. In rural areas, substations were set up at district or central townships level, covering population ranging from 50,000 to 70,000. Step by step, public uh, or security organs to control our population registration and guarding. Thanks. Guarding cities against the influx of rural people. Now, on the same day, the National People's Congress promulgated organic regulations of urban street offices. Street offices had their own staff and budget allocated by the provincial and municipal government. Although Article 5 limited full-time cadre to between 3 and 7, after 1960, most offices actually increased staff to between 10 and 15. In Beijing, the total number of officials often exceeded 30 per office by the late 1970s. Having consolidated institutions for police administrative control or population movement, on 22 June 1955, the State Council passed and Premier Zhao Enlil signed the directive concerning establishment of a permanent system of household registration. This directive formally initiated a full-blown Hausa system on the eve of China's imposed collectivization. There are several differences between 1951 and 1955 regulations. First, while the former pertained exclusively to the cities, the latter defined a comprehensive nationwide Hansa system embracing city and countryside. Secondly, administrative administration at the highest level was taken out of the hands of public security and placed in the hands of Ministry of Interior and Civil Affairs Department of the government at country and higher level. Nevertheless, the public security station retains local administrative control, and in 1958 it would regain complete control. Thirdly, 1955 regulations specified detailed procedures for individuals changing residency to apply for migration certificate. So this will be all for today. But still, as we have been reading about it, the Chinese has pretty much created their own caste system. It was there before it, but in a different form per se. Because in the form before this, what used to happen was the emperor or the royal family or the warriors will be on the highest order. Then they will become scholars. Now scholars were from the noble family only. Only the noble families children were allowed to become scholars. Nobody else can become scholar, because nobody else uh, had the capacity to meet the conditions to become a scholar. After that, there will be farmers, and then will be merchants. Just like we see in all the societies of the East Asia, Korea, Japan, all the merchant class will be the least productive class according to them. So they will be on the bottom, and the warrior or the scholar class will be at the top. Uh, But here they are trying to create a class system which is based on the communist, let's say, communist guidelines to some extent, that the divide is between rural and urban rather than the class, because the class divide they are already destroyed pretty much, because there is only two classes now: the one who is controlling and the one who is controlled, the workers and the state. Everyone else is working under the state by hook and crook. Either they are working directly or indirectly, it doesn't matter. They are just working for the government. So if anybody has any views to share. Yes. Why is suddenly coming out now? Like, why not before? Now, why now? Because we as a Indians, we are looking into it now. Before that, we were not looking at it, because we were only how should I say it? We were just going on and on about our own whatever nonsense that uh, whatever the problems we our society was, rather than solving them, or rather than looking like it's a problem that every society has and we have to overcome. Rather than looking it like that, we are just criticizing our own in a weird loophole where we are some unique species that has a unique problem and which needs a unique solution. There is nothing unique about it. There is nothing. Hierarchies are the foundation of a society. It has to be. If there are no hierarchy, nobody will produce anything, nor will anybody have any motivation. Now, as far as the your question, to this particular extent, we are in a situation where we have got a lot more population on the Western publications, like the Twitter and all those social media, rather than Chinese. Chinese had have isolated themselves from the world. It has pros and cons. The pro is that nobody will interfere in your work. Like all the Western governments will not be able to interfere in your government structure or in your society. But con is also is that you will not be able to interfere also. Now here because of our amount of people we have on the internet, we are able to create narrative. We are just not unified till now. But China is an issue where every Indian, to the most part, will unify itself against China, because it is, we see it as a common not existential, but a common threat to our sovereignty. So that's why, for the most part, I think it was a kind of a joke they were creating, but the joke turned out to be a reality. They did not know. I don't think the one who was initiated all these, even knew that the Chinese caste system existed. For the most part, anybody else? Was there a message? Anything like? Yeah, he was a fan of Stalin. No, he was a fanboy of Stalin. So he would criticize anybody. He would criticize anybody because, according to him, only Stalin used to follow I guess not Marxist, the communist manifesto to the point. Because he is the only one he and Mao are the only one who had literally massacred and genocided millions of people. Other than that, nobody has done that. So Mao is the only equal. He sees him equal. So anybody else that comes after Stalin will be how's it, inferior version of Stalin, who is not even implementing the real policies. So there's that. There's the ideological uh, thing. Uh, British are good at covering their tracks. That's the thing. They will cover everything. They are expert at gaslighting themselves also and others also. They have gaslighted themselves to such an extent that they think they are superior to everyone. But if you look at it, they are the worst of all, because everything that a medieval society has, they already have. Every bad aspect of a medieval society, their society have, because the only walking engine or the only industrial area of that country is London. Other than that, everything else is a third world country. I- we are using third world as a word to insult someone, but if you compare it to any other country, let's say Asia or anywhere else, you will not see very much difference. This is London. Even London has become a kind of a ridiculous area where all kinds of nonsensical uh, items will come and they will live there. And just, uh, it has become some kind of hodgepodge. There's nothing that is original to that country. Nothing. There is no culture to that country. Everything they have gained is through invasion. Someone will come, they will invade, they will impose their culture, and it has become their culture. They have nothing of their own. And even, means, if you can debate a Britishers, you are just a champion in my eyes. Because that guy, you cannot debate a guy like that. He has his entire generation has been gaslighted. That's just how they are. Any more comments? Uh, Chinese are not first world too per se, because if we go by the definition of first world, you have to behave a certain kind to be a first world. If you meet a Chinese, because the transformation has been so rapid there is no change in their behavior. The change will be, it will be like this: the people who were in the cities, you will see some kind of a first world behavior from them. But those that moved to the, let's say, uh, those that had come from middle now, in China, only the rich will behave like first world people. Anybody who is middle class or lower middle class or anybody lower than them will behave like an animal, literal animal. They will behave like a third world, like, let's say, let's go like an African, like, no, not the African, let's say an African American. They will behave like an African American in any other country they will visit. You will not find any kind of, let's say, You will not find any difference between an African American of USA and a Chinese person. If they both go to some country and they will behave pretty much the same. They will make a mess out of the country wherever they will visit. They don't see people as people. They see in the in the form of a labor or tools to use, because they are communists. No, even if we forget everything, let's say communism and everything else go, just we set it aside. Chinese always used to do that. They will consider anybody who is not in the power as fodder, which the fodder, the people, common people are tools for the state or the one in the power. They will be used as a cannon fodder for everything, and they will experiment with everything. Yeah, they are two different nations. No, if you look at the videos from the YouTube, or if you can find someone who lives in Chinese village, you will not find very different. Their village is very different from India. Even I would go as far as to say the Indian villages are better than the Chinese ones. If you ignore the infra, even infra wise, Indian villages have become better, or to some extent equal to the Chinese. Our people will behave better at any day from Chinese. Chinese cannot make it, because you see, it is geographical limitations. Like, let's say in India, why was every empire, every major empire, if you leave the Vijayanagar and some others, why they always form somewhere around Bihar or the Patliputra area? Because the geography supports it. All the indigenous, let's say, kingdoms, or all those, they will not be able to sustain themselves for long, because the northern side of the China is a plain area. So they will have the advantage always in number, in term of numbers and population and economy, everything. In every way they will always have advantage over the southern, or the inland people, because inland of China is very mountainous. Only the area near the Beijing and those areas are flat. China is not a very flat country. It doesn't have a lot of agricultural land to farm. China, even the most, it's a main staple of China is rice. Even that is being imported from India or other countries. They cannot even do that much, because most of the land, because of the industrialization, is polluted. And even if it is not polluted, that land cannot sustain 1.3, 1.4 billion people. It is not possible. Only in India they can sustain. Geography doesn't allow China to be fragmented for very long. It can't be. Any comments? Anybody else? City dwellers will, even in city dwellers, there is a hierarchy. Those who are members of the communist, Chinese Communist Party, they will behave to some extent. Uh, they will behave. It is not they are good or anything like that. They just behave better because they know they have to maintain their images, and those, and the rich people, they will behave. Other than that, even middle class people are like that. Not everyone, but majority, you will find that they are worse. The worst tourists you will find are American and Chinese, both equally. Both are equally ridiculous, and both are nonsensical to a level that we have not seen before. Yeah, yeah, they are just like that. Not really. They have survived, because you see, Chinese center, the capital of the China is very far from the southern territories, like the Cantonese or all those places, the southern Chinese, the we are near the Vietnam or all those places, near the Thailand, uh, Myanmar border and all such stuff. They the political system will be there, but the people are able to preserve their culture and their languages, their school of thought they are able to preserve. That is there. But other than that, they are not able to do much because state sponsorship is not there. No, China, all East Asian nations, if your ideology or if your thought or let's say political school has to survive, it has to be let's say state sponsored. You have to come in power for your ideology to sustain itself. Let's say tomorrow the Chinese Communist Party go out of power. What do you think will happen? The communism will end itself on its own. Nobody will give a shit about it because it is not in power. Their power is the societies like China, which are highly centralized, which are highly bureaucratic. They need a state for everything. Even the ideology that you want to percolate down the throats of people, it has to be through the state. If it is a let's say uh, ground up, then that ideology will not go away, but it will not be able to come to power also. Both of these are true. Even if it come to power, it will not be able to force it down the throats of people. It has to be state sponsored. If your ideology wants to be go just like Buddhism was also a state sponsored religion in China. You see, there was this empress of China who wanted to make Buddhism as a state religion. I don't know what happened. I think she got killed or something. I guess something like that. But the Buddhism that we see in China, it was not a ground up moment. It was forced down the throats of Chinese for the most part. Anything else? Was there a message? Any comment? Yes. So we are looking for volunteers. If anyone is interested, they can contact on our website. Send us a message. We will look into it and see what we can do. If your credentials are good, we will hire you. Thank you. This will be all for today. Namaskar.